This episode of Eat the Rules is brought to you by You on Fire. You on Fire is the online group coaching program that I run that gives you a step-by-step way of building up your self-worth beyond your appearance. With personalized coaching from me, incredible community support, and lifetime access to the program so that you can get free from body shame and live life on your own terms. Get details on what's included and sign up for the next cycle at summerinanen.com/you on fire. I'd love to have you in that group. This is Eat the Rules, a podcast about body image, self-worth, anti-dieting, and intersectional feminism. I am your host, Summer Inanen, a professionally trained coach specializing in body image, self-worth, and confidence, and the best-selling author of Body Image Remix. If you're ready to break free of societal standards and stop living behind the number on your scale, then you have come to the right place. Welcome to the show. This is episode 268, and I'm joined by Christy Harrison, author of Anti-Diet and most recently, The Wellness Trap. We're talking about why, as a culture, we're so obsessed with wellness and how social media perpetuates this. We're also debunking some of the more common wellness claims and what to watch out for so that you don't fall into the wellness trap. You can find all the links and resources mentioned at summerinanen.com/268. I want to give a shout out to Olpa Cotter, who left this review. I'm here as a counselor listening to these podcasts for myself, my daughter, and my clients. I love her research-based, humanistic approach to how to work with yourself in the body you're in. She is so well-spoken, informed on social justice issues, including race and privilege, and she really understands the way the brain and human behavior works. I'll be listening to as many of these as I can and share this with my clients who struggle with these issues. Thank you so much. That review is really, really meaningful to me. I mean, it's everything I want this show to be. So I really appreciate that feedback and that you took the time to leave that review. You can leave a review for this podcast by going to Apple Podcasts, search for Eat the Rules, then click to leave a review or give it a rating. A review is always preferred because I'll read it on the show. And it doesn't have to be a long one. It just can be one sentence like, this is the best thing ever. Don't forget to grab the free 10-day Body Confidence Makeover at summerinanen.com/freebies with 10 steps to take right now to feel better in your body. And if you are somebody who works with people who may also have body image struggles, so if you're a dietitian, a coach, a therapist, an educator, a personal trainer, a naturopathic doctor, like I'm just trying to think of all the people that I've worked with around this, but we have a free body image coaching roadmap for you at summerinanen.com/roadmap. And that gives you a way of understanding how to take your clients through a process in terms of working with them with body image struggles. I am really excited to have Christy back on the show. She's been on the show a couple of times before. The first time, many, many years ago, episode 71, that's going way, way back. That might even be when I had the Guns N' Roses intro. And then episode 170, which we did a couple years ago when Anti-Diet came out. And that one's called Anti-Diet and Intuitive Eating 101 with Christy Harrison, which is like a really, really good episode if you need kind of a great overall summary of why diets fail and really looking into like quote unquote the obesity epidemic and things like that. So that's an amazing episode to check out. So I'm thrilled to have her back on the show today to promote her latest book, The Wellness Trap. I really enjoyed reading this, especially because I came from a background as a holistic nutritionist, and so many of the things that she really critiques and looks at what the research actually says are things that I learned in school, which is really, really interesting because those are things that are probably still being taught. They're pretty prolific within the natural wellness field. And it's interesting because I kind of sit in the middle on this because I've actually had some incredible experiences with naturopathic doctors. Of course, with any of those, I've really had some firm boundaries. Like I'm not going to make any changes with food. And it's really been around like hormone stuff that they've helped me with. And specifically the first one was the first practitioner to actually say, hey, you have a disordered relationship with food and you're over exercising and you need to eat a lot more than you're eating. So sometimes I honestly think that one naturopathic doctor kind of saved my life, because I'd been to so many other actual doctors who had told me that my body size was too big to have hypothalamic amenorrhea. That's what it's called, right? Anyways, I digress. But the point is that when we look at kind of the overall things that are suggested within wellness culture, a lot of them can kind of send us down this dark path, but there's also some good practitioners out there if you can find them. Christy Harrison is a registered dietitian nutritionist, certified intuitive eating counselor, and journalist who has been covering food, nutrition, and health for more than 20 years. She is the author of 2 books, The Wellness Trap and Anti-Diet, and the producer and host of the podcast, Rethinking Wellness and Food Psych, which have helped tens of thousands of people around the world think critically about diet and wellness culture and develop more peaceful relationships with food. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Self, BuzzFeed, Refinery 29, Gourmet, Slate, The Food Network, and many other publications, and her work is regularly featured in national print and broadcast media. You can find more about Christy at christyharrison.com. Let's get started with the show. Hi, Christy. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Summer. Thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here today and to talk about your new book, The Wellness Trap. Before we dive into some of the concepts that you talk about in the book, I'd love for you to just share maybe just a little bit about your own personal experience with wellness in kind of quotation marks. Like, what was your own journey with that then ultimately led you down the road, obviously, to get into the work that you do now?
Yeah, such a great question. So I have multiple chronic health conditions that I've been managing for, a couple decades now. And I initially started to experience symptoms when I had just started dieting and developed disordered eating and sort of undiagnosed eating disorder behaviors, really. And unbeknownst to me, I think that was at the root of a lot of it, or at least that was what triggered some of these chronic conditions, but they've stuck around, and they're things that, wellness culture really loves to target, like autoimmune conditions, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is like autoimmune and hormonal. So there's that piece too, like hormone health and how wellness culture targets that, digestive disorders, eczema, acne, like skin conditions, lots of things that sort of exist in this targeted space of wellness culture. Wellness culture loves to offer solutions in the form of often diets and supplements and unproven, untested practices. And so I really fell into that hard because I was feeling dismissed and unheard by the conventional healthcare system. I felt like doctors were not getting it. They didn't know what to do with me. I was bouncing from doctor to doctor and just not really getting the relief and support that I wanted and that I deserved, and nobody was picking up on really the connection with disordered eating either. And so I think that's something that could also have helped my experience, but nobody knew what to do with me. And so I was very attracted to, natural, quote unquote, natural protocols. I think it also dovetailed with where I was in my life and my career at the time, which I had just graduated college, was a young journalist covering environmental issues, nutrition, health, sustainable food. I was very in the mix with all of that stuff and thinking about food systems in the sort of Michael Pollan, Marion Nestle way that was trendy at the time, and blaming food for causing people to gain weight, and seeing things through the lens of a quote unquote obesity epidemic, which I now know is such a stigmatizing way of framing things, but I really believed in it at the time. And so, it was all tangled up with my own issues. And I tried to heal my issues, quote unquote, naturally because of sort of those pre-existing beliefs that I had about food and about, the sort of moral virtue and value of doing things, quote unquote, naturally. And because I was feeling so dismissed by the conventional healthcare system that I kind of felt like I had no choice. So, I found a lot of, it was really early, well, some of it was pre-social media, but also really early days of social media of Friendster and MySpace, and, Facebook didn't even exist yet when I was first struggling with these conditions. And social media as we know know it didn't really exist. It was more like social networking. It was just like finding your friends online. It wasn't algorithms driving people down rabbit holes. And so I was able to, even though I found my way to a lot of like really extreme sort of wellness content at the time, it wasn't mainstream. It was very fringy. And I was able to kind of think, this isn't really for me. Like, I don't feel like this resonates, and kind of walk back from some of it pretty easily. I did get very hooked with like gluten-free diets and other elimination diets and the idea of cutting out food and managing everything through food. So that piece was really sticky for me. But like some of the other stuff, other sort of more non-standard protocols and stuff, I wasn't as hooked by. But now I see so many people getting hooked into this stuff that was so on the fringes back when I was first struggling and first looking for answers. And so that was a big motivation in writing this book, is that like I've seen so many people over the years, and I think increasingly in recent years, coming to me and saying, I have chronic candida, or I have adrenal fatigue, or I have, leaky gut syndrome diagnosed by my naturopath or my functional medicine doctor, or a questionnaire. And, what do I do about it? Like I've been prescribed all these diets, and it's ruining my relationship with food, and like help me heal my relationship with food, even when I have to do these quote unquote medically necessary diets. And so that was a big piece of it, was like starting to do that research and seeing that these supposed conditions that people had weren't really validated by good evidence, and that they were being used to sell these protocols and supplements and practices that were also not, scientifically well supported, and causing a lot of harm to people's relationships with food and their bodies. And another piece of why I wanted to write this book was that, in 2020 with the pandemic, I started to see how wellness culture was really seizing on that to sell people products and, promote like multi-level marketing schemes and all of these things that just are so potentially detrimental to people's well-being and have no good evidence behind them. People selling their essential oil as a supposed COVID cure, or their vitamin protocol or detox as like a way to avoid getting it. And, that was all happening kind of at the same time as the pandemic was really shining a light on the social determinants of health and how important those are for overall population well-being, and how like the people who were already the most marginalized were the ones getting the sickest and getting sicker in greater numbers. And, the people who were able to like work from home or, stay home and not engage outside and like order in all their groceries and stuff like that were the people who were staying safer. So it was just this interesting juxtaposition, I think, of like all this wellness rhetoric with sort of the pandemic shining such a stark light on the importance of social determinants of health for actual well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good explanation for it. And so you mentioned a couple of your own personal reasons about kind of getting into, going down on sort of the wellness rabbit hole, like being dismissed and unheard, which I think so many of us can relate to, and particularly anyone who is of like a more marginalized identity is going to face that even more so. But why do you think like culturally we continue to kind of become more and more obsessed with wellness?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's like at the systemic level, there really are failings of the conventional healthcare system. I think people feel unheard and dismissed in sort of high numbers in a lot of cases. And also, even if they don't, like even if they feel like they're getting decent care from their doctor, there's just not really a lot of time in the healthcare system. I say the healthcare system, like I'm speaking from a US lens, and I know you're in Canada, but even though they're very different healthcare systems, I think our healthcare system being for profit still has something in common with other like national healthcare systems, in the sense that doctors are so overworked and overbooked that they really don't have time in any of these healthcare systems to give adequate attention to patients, I think. And people, in national healthcare systems often are on really long waiting lists to get access to a doctor. And so it can be super frustrating, I think, when you finally do get there, to have the doctor say, well, I'm not really sure what's wrong with you. Go see this specialist and wait another year or something, And in the US, like even if you don't, have long waiting lists or whatever, there's like lack of access for other reasons, like lack of insurance or just lack of geographical access to providers and things like that. So I think there's those systemic failings that, make the conventional healthcare system, and that's not to say, that's to say nothing of the discrimination that exists in the conventional healthcare system and the anti-fat bias and racism and other forms of discrimination that people experience when they go to the doctor that is also something that drives people away from that system. And so I think when people are feeling failed by conventional medicine, wellness culture is sort of right there to sell them an alternative. And wellness culture often capitalizes on that, I think, on the failings of conventional healthcare. I think there's a lot of amplification of the problems with the conventional healthcare system, the problems with the pharmaceutical industry, and, blaming big pharma and the medical industrial complex for all kinds of things, which, again, there's a lot of truth to that. And I think it's unfortunate that there are so many failings in the conventional system. And I think we need to fix that and change that. And the promises that wellness culture is offering often don't fail to deliver. Often the products and practices and services are not actually effective and can in fact cause harm. One thing that I think the alternative systems do well, though, is give empathy and time. That's something that I think we don't see as much of in the conventional system. And I think again and again in my reporting and also in my personal experience, I've found that when you go to an alternative practitioner, when you go to an acupuncturist or a chiropractor or a naturopath or someone who's in the more integrative space where they're doing alternative medicine under the auspices of medical doctors, functional medicine providers or integrative medicine doctors, that you do see a lot more empathy and time given to you in those spaces. And it can feel really great. And it can feel finally someone's taking me seriously. Finally, someone is going to get to the bottom of this. And my symptoms aren't being dismissed. I'm actually being heard. And that goes a long way to helping people feel better. There's actually something called the care effect, which is part of a family of placebo effects where, expectations and sort of how you feel in a situation or how you expect to feel given a particular treatment can actually have a physical impact on your body. It's not all in your head. It's actually the mind-body connection at work. And so with the care effect, having an empathetic care provider who makes you feel heard and understood can definitely create some pain relief and create some symptom relief. And so I think that's one aspect of it that's really attractive to people. I think another reason for this proliferation of wellness culture is that social media algorithms are really driving people towards kind of more and more extreme wellness content, so that the things that were really on the fringes back, 20 years ago or whenever I was searching for answers, at first, now those things have become so mainstream, and we have things that are even more bizarre and fringy, the medical medium saying that he talks to a spirit who tells him how to diagnose people, and that, celery juice is the cure to all ills, and science hasn't caught up with that yet. And so don't worry about the fact that there's no studies to prove it. A spirit told me. And, it's just super bizarre out there stuff that I think really works well on social media because the algorithms are designed to amplify and promote content that is, novel, that sort of gets these outraged responses or shocked responses from people, gets people debating in the comments, stuff that's, polarizing or controversial. And, all misinformation really hits all those notes that social media is sort of designed to promote and foster. And really the reason that the algorithms drive us toward that kind of content in the first place is not because they're designed with any sort of nefarious intent, but because they're designed to just maximize engagement and keep us on the platforms liking, clicking, sharing, so that we'll be exposed to more advertising, and therefore the platforms make more money because that's their business model. And, it just so happens that this outrage-inducing content, this novel content, misinformation really hits all the notes that drive engagement. And so I think that's another big piece of why wellness culture has become so prevalent, is that people are seeing these more and more extreme things on social media, and, that also are getting picked up by, there's, this sort of ecosystem, really, this media ecosystem where websites like Goop or, other sort of wellnessy websites are writing headlines and, design and putting up stories and stuff that are designed to take advantage of that algorithmic juice that's given to, novel, controversial, sort of wacky things. And so, you get a lot of these really out there, extreme sort of wellness practices and protocols becoming more and more mainstream as people are sharing them and they're going viral. And, it's just become such a part of the zeitgeist now to think about, like to treat food as medicine. I think that wasn't part of the conversation in the way it is now 20 years ago, certainly not as mainstream, and some of these really out there things that maybe I'm not going to say like a lot of examples because I don't want to, give people ideas or activate disordered behaviors or thoughts in anyone. But, even some of the really out there stuff is now much more mainstream and common. And you might hear, your mom or your dentist or whatever talking about it,
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like Dr. Oz was like really kind of the initiator for a lot of this in terms of it becoming so mainstream. But he did a lot. That's true. Yeah. I feel a lot of this it almost like mirrors kind of the magical thinking of diet culture, right? Like where you have, okay, if you just do these things, then everything, you lose weight and your life will be perfect and you'll be happy and confident and all this other stuff. And this is almost similar. It's like, if you do these things, then you will be like, well, you will be able to relieve yourself of all these symptoms and everything will be better. And so I think it kind of anchors people in this idea of like hope of like, okay, if I do this, then I can have more vitality or I can live longer or I can, not be in pain. And like, we know how powerful that is in terms of the dieting cycle. And I feel like this mirrors that in a very similar way and sucks people in.
Totally. Yeah. I think it really creates this sense of, individual responsibility and choice, and like you're in charge of your own wellness and you get to pick and choose your wellness protocols and practices in order to like optimize your wellness and your physical body. And that is really appealing, I think, when people don't have hope and when they're feeling like disempowered by the conventional healthcare system and like they don't have any answers or relief, to say, well, you can do all these things and you'll be well. You'll, reduce your symptoms or even put your disease into remission. That's a line of rhetoric we're seeing a lot in wellness culture now, is like, you can reverse chronic disease, you can reverse aging, And so I think that's incredibly appealing when you don't have other good answers. But even for people without chronic conditions, I think there's like this medicalization that happens in wellness culture, and it happens in conventional healthcare too, where, just sort of everyday symptoms that people might experience, like bloating or fatigue or, difficulty concentrating some of the time or whatever, or, just like any number of things that are sort of garden variety human ailments, occasional heartburn, whatever. Those things are now framed as signs of unwellness and signs of toxicity in the body. And, you have to sort of root out, like get to the root cause of those things. And there's this rhetoric that I think is really seductive in wellness culture that I know I fell for, which was like, you don't have to live like this. You don't have to deal with these things. You can feel so much better than you do. And when you're feeling like profound chronic illness, I think that is incredibly seductive. But even if you're just experiencing these sort of everyday ailments in a culture that makes us feel so ashamed for having them and so ashamed for having bodies, and for having like stomachs that get a little round after we eat, or, that are round in general or whatever and get rounder at the end of the day, right? From bloating, or feel bad about our like gas or our burps or whatever it is. I think it becomes really appealing too, to say like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have to live like this. Like I shouldn't have bloating, my stomach should not look this way. And there's so much anti-fat bias baked into that too, with this notion that like a flat stomach is a good stomach, a well stomach or whatever. But I think it's, there's so many restrictive ideas and oppressive ideas about what a well body looks like in general and what a well body should function like, that it's just sort of like sucks everyone in, I think, because in this culture, in wellness culture, like you're never well enough and there's always more you could be doing, you always have to be optimizing. So I think it's just a losing proposition. And I think about people like, Gwyneth Paltrow with all the money in the world and, who's like an acolyte of all these wellness protocols. And yet she's still chronically ill. She still struggles. She still, it takes up so much of her life. It's literally something she's built her business on, her entire kind of brand and empire. And yet, she's still struggling. She's still not, quote unquote, well by wellness culture standards. And so it's like, what are we even striving for here? What is like the goalposts are always moving and you can never quite get there.
Yeah. And similar to dieting, it takes away so much time and energy to constantly be fixating on it. Like I remember kind of being down that rabbit hole as well. And similar to you, a lot of my issues were actually the result of disordered eating and just like going so obsessed with it because I was just like, there has to be like a reason, there has to be something I'm missing here. And I think that there's this overall belief now of like, you should be able to kind of like heal yourself. Like you should be able to like get to the root cause and figure it out when like through natural means, right? Whereas like, as you talk about a lot in your book and you kind of dispel a lot of the specific things, the different kind of protocols and things that get recommended, but it's just not true. And we kind of, the solution becomes the problem when you start to like, when it starts to kind of take up so much time and space to figure these things out when like you could really just turn to conventional medicine and maybe get like, some sort of like actual medication that might help you, and I know that that's not always like, and just an easy solution either. And that sometimes that like a lot of these medications have horrible side effects and whatnot. But I feel like there's this belief of like, you should be able to heal this. And I remember that when I was a nutritionist, like, thinking that and thinking like, this is why I want to do this because people can just be well, like people can heal themselves. And so it came from really good intentions, but was obviously like really misguided.
Yeah, totally. I think about like the research on social determinants of health and how it shows that at the population level, when it comes to like modifiable determinants of health, things that we have any control over at the societal or individual level, individual behaviors only account for 30% of the pie and only 10% is food and exercise combined. And then 90% is other things, including 70% is social determinants of health. And I think in diet and wellness culture, we have that image reversed. We think that like 90% of the pie or more is food and exercise, and maybe the small sliver is other things that, are other types of behaviors we could do or societal stuff. But yeah, it's just interesting how deeply rooted that belief is and how central it is to so many people's, philosophies and practices. Like as a dietitian as well, I definitely believed that, when I first went into it, just thinking that like I could help people heal themselves through food or prevent any sort of chronic disease from setting in if they just ate the right things. There's this really seductive idea that that food is medicine and that you can treat anything through food and maybe also, exercise and supplements and related kind of protocols. But there's this idea that like, you're really getting to the root cause if you're dealing with food and exercise and supplements and stuff, which is, I think about like how appealing that idea of a root cause is, again, when you're feeling dismissed by conventional healthcare or that like the only solutions conventional healthcare has for you is just, take this pharmaceutical that has some pretty nasty side effects or that isn't totally effective. We really don't know a lot else to treat your condition, or we don't know what it is, so we don't even know how to treat it. That doesn't feel super satisfying. And when someone says to you, like, we're going to get to the root cause, we're not just going to treat the symptoms and we're going to treat you as a whole person. We're not going to just silo you into different parts and systems and have you, work with one person for your digestive stuff and another person for your endocrine stuff and whatever. We're going to like look at you as a whole person. That is so appealing. And that's like so what we want, I think, in those situations. But the reality is so different. And I think actually the so-called root cause in so much of alternative and integrative and functional medicine is just predetermined. It's just, the root cause always is deemed to be food and supplements and exercise maybe, but, mostly food. And, that's actually not treating the whole person. That's actually not seeing the person's unique situation. And, I talked to many people in the book for whom that was really a harmful approach that, it led them to significantly disordered eating. And it also missed what was actually going on for them, which in some cases was really serious. I talked to one woman who had a tumor on her pancreas that was missed because the functional medicine doctor or nurse practitioner she was working with was like, well, yeah, when your body is all inflamed, that's just how it is. And we have to heal this inflammation through this restrictive diet and these shakes and these supplements, and then you'll find relief. Just totally missing this tumor that was actually causing the problems.
Yeah. Wow. That's really scary. One of the other things that I saw recently is that there's like a course you can take to become a functional medicine coach. And I feel like that lingo is so deceiving because there are functional medicine doctors and they are actually like nurse practitioners or doctors. And then now there's like you can become a functional medicine coach, and it's literally just like a year-long program. And then you get to, I actually just looked into it because I was like, what is this? And you get, you can like take, get your clients to take all these tests. And I'm just like, oh my God, like this is really scary. That's really scary that you're putting your, and by the way, like I actually do believe in, like I have a really good naturopathic doctor that does a lot of great stuff for me hormonally. So I don't want to say that like anything is all bad or all good, but like it is really scary to me when you see the way that kind of like people can be trained to potentially like work with people on really serious medical conditions without having like any kind of background in sciences or biology or medicine. And even me becoming a nutritionist, I think back about what we learned in school, and they were giving us like protocols to deal with like kidney issues. And I'm just like, and I remember at the time being like, I don't feel comfortable like giving someone this huge protocol to deal with a kidney issue. Like this doesn't feel right to me. And so, yeah, it's a bit worrisome in that regard.
Yeah, completely. I feel like functional medicine already is something I am very skeptical of because of its lack of strong evidence base. I think, there's a lot of doctors and nurse practitioners and other providers in that space who really want to do good and want to help their patients, and I think are coming from a good place. But there's a lot of very early stage science or, science that's just happening in like cells and animals that's being translated into humans that, I think is really not appropriate to do that. It's not ready to be used for clinical recommendations. And yet I see that happening a lot in the functional medicine space. But then, but at least there's people who are, trained doctors and nurse practitioners and nurses and, that could potentially order conventional treatments or conventional tests as well if the need arose, if they saw the need for that. And like if it's a coach who doesn't have any of that sort of training or the ability to even really, order anything themselves, like they might have to refer out or whatever. But who knows at the individual level, like whether they're going to actually be doing that, going to be referring to a doctor if it's necessary or not, and just, yeah, it seems risky.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was like, what's your advice to people to move forward? Like, how can people sort of watch out? Like, what should people watch out for or screen in terms of information that they're finding or like practitioners that they're choosing to work with?
Yeah, it's really a tricky world out there. And I think there's a lot of things that need to change. So, I want to say, first of all, like this is not all an individual responsibility. These are systemic issues, I think, that need to be addressed at the societal level too, and kind of first and foremost, like addressing social determinants of health and foregrounding mental health, not just sort of focusing on the physical and making health out to be this individual responsibility. Regulating the tech industry, I think, is also really important. Regulating social media so that we can reduce the spread of misinformation and disinformation, and regulating the supplement industry, which in the US and Canada is kind of the Wild West. It's like largely unregulated, really only regulated post-market. So things don't get tested for safety and efficacy before they go to market. They only could be recalled after they go to market. And in practice, the enforcement is really spotty and doesn't happen as much as it should. So I think like all of those things need to change, and we need, systemic level and societal level action on those things. But that said, there are also things people can do, I think, to take care of themselves. And at the individual level, sort of in addition to and while waiting for the societal changes to happen. One thing is that I would just encourage everyone to try to approach alternative and integrative and functional medicine and the wellness industry in general, really, with as much skepticism or more skepticism as you would have for conventional medicine. Because I think, as I mentioned before, like wellness culture and the wellness industry are really good at sort of fanning the flames of people's mistrust of the conventional healthcare system and sort of amping up that message and proposing their offerings as a solution. And so just being skeptical of that and realizing that, just because someone says something is natural or gentle or better than conventional healthcare doesn't mean that it actually is. And that, I think we need to be probably more skeptical of the wellness industry and, providers in this sort of alternative space because they have even less evidence behind them in a lot of cases. Not that there is nothing wrong, there's a lot wrong with the conventional healthcare system too, but I think there's just even more to be wary of in wellness culture. I think also not to assume that, wellness recommendations are based on any sound science, even when science is cited or even when, I think that a lot of alternative providers and sort of wellness culture advocates and entrepreneurs really like to claim to be super science-based. And this is cutting edge research. And, this is at the forefront of medical knowledge and all this stuff. But another word for cutting edge research is just really early stage research that isn't actually ready for prime time. It's a lot of scientific research. There's a lot of exciting research that happens, in early stages, and then other scientists try to replicate it and can't. And that's the vast majority of science. There'll be these promising results from a trial in rats or a cell experiment or a trial in 10 volunteers or something. But then, when it's replicated by another group with a larger participant base and in humans, oftentimes, really most often is the case that the results aren't replicated, and so I think that's something to be aware of, that when people are touting cutting edge science or whatever, that it's often just this really early stage research that isn't going to go anywhere. And so that's another thing to kind of look out for. And then I would say too, with any given wellness treatment or practice, just trying to be mindful of your own experience and realize the power of expectations, the power of the care effect, and how helpful that can be at first, but then recognizing that those things can also sometimes wear off. The placebo effect is powerful, but it does sort of decline over time, especially when the treatment or protocol itself isn't itself effective. And so, you might feel really hopeful when you're starting out, you might feel better, a little bit better, but then as time goes by, the good feeling starts to wear off and you're not sure, your symptoms return, maybe you get some new symptoms. You just don't know whether you're really feeling better. And then oftentimes what happens is wellness providers will recommend, adding other treatments, adding other dietary restrictions, becoming even more, going further down the rabbit hole, basically, of the wellness protocols and practices. So I think really being skeptical of that and just noticing okay, if it feels like the potential benefits of whatever I've been doing are starting to wear off, what would it be like to go back to not doing the thing, and see any difference in my experience that way, or, at least not going further down the rabbit hole and adding more and more and more restrictions. Because I think that's where it gets really disordered for a lot of people, where people can really get into some seriously disordered eating and relationships with their bodies. And I think everybody is, especially everyone listening to this podcast probably is at risk of disordered eating in this culture. I think very few people are not at risk. So just knowing when you're going into any sort of wellness practice or alternative medicine, protocol or whatever, that the recommendations to cut out foods and dietary restrictions are going to put at risk your relationship with food and your body, and to be really mindful of whether that's appropriate for you or not, and in some cases, I think you can talk to providers and say, I have a history of an eating disorder or of disordered eating, or, I'm struggling in my relationship with food, and I don't think that going on a restrictive diet is going to be helpful to me, and just kind of see what they say, and if they're supportive of that and willing to look at other treatments and not put you on a diet, that could potentially be a sign of someone who's good to work with. If they really double down and say, no, we have to do this and this is the only way, that might be a red flag. And maybe, it's potentially helpful to look for a second opinion, switch providers if you can, if that's available to you. And I know access is sometimes an issue there too. So another, I think, helpful way to protect yourself from wellness misinformation and disinformation is trying to take a step back from social media and recognizing how it pushes us increasingly towards extreme content that isn't necessarily backed by good evidence, and how it may have sucked you in already further than you'd intended. And so not looking to social media for your ideas of what to try or what to do. And I know that sometimes social media can be important for community and feeling connected to other people who are going through similar things. But as much as you can, trying to separate that from not using it to diagnose or treat any condition, and also not typing into a social media search engine or into Google without any sort of, making sure you have ad blockers and privacy protection on your computer so that you're not creating this breadcrumb trail for the social media companies to use to retarget you, because that happens. A lot of websites have targeting trackers on them that send your information back to Facebook and to Google and, allow those ads to follow you around the internet for something that you once clicked on. And that's creepy in and of itself. But, the creepier thing is that they have these entire dossiers on all of us on our behaviors, our demographics, our psychographics, and, what we're interested in, including any wellness stuff that we're interested in or any health conditions that we have. And that can allow the algorithms to feed us some really potentially harmful content. So, really trying to protect yourself from social media in that way. And then finally, I think one useful tool that, would be a whole other conversation I go into in more depth in the book, but there's this strategy called SIFT that you can use when you come across wellness information online. And it was developed by a researcher at the University of Washington named Mike Caulfield, who studies digital media literacy. And it stands for its 4 steps, which are stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace claims, quotes, and media to their original context. And I think that's a nice little heuristic for just not getting too engaged with any wellness information or really any kind of information that you find online, but looking at the context first and deciding whether it's something that you really trust and whether it's something you want to give your time and energy to, or whether it's something that you rather, sidebar and sort of look elsewhere for your wellness content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super, super helpful. And I really appreciated that approach, because I feel like nowadays people will just take, one tweet that they saw or one thing that they saw, one nugget of information that they saw in a headline, and take it as, as a fact and as truth. And we have to really slow down and try to figure out, where is this coming from? Is there validity to this? Because otherwise we're just, taking whatever somebody just can make up and say, which is unfortunately happening quite a bit of, which we found during COVID, right? And it's quite scary. And I think social media trains our brain to just see something and take it as truth, and really, rapidly kind of digest little nuggets of information instead of really slowing down and kind of, going in depth with something and checking, actually looking into something. And it doesn't even take that much time, I found, because I've done that quite a few times with people that are, people that have been, somebody I knew from high school who I still follow on Facebook, who posts some sort of claim, and I looked it up, and it was really easy to disprove in about 30 seconds. So I was wait a minute, that's not even true. But yeah, I appreciate all of those suggestions. And I really loved in your book how, you just went into so many different things. What does the research say about intermittent fasting and manifesting, and leaky gut and candida and all that stuff. So I highly recommend people pick up a copy to get into kind of the nitty gritty of it all. And as always, it was extremely well researched and well written. So I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much. It's so good to talk with you. And I really, really appreciate you having me on, and glad you like the book.
Yeah. So where can people find you, Christy?
Yeah, so people can find me on my website, which is christyharrison.com, which has all the links to my book and places to buy it. You can also get the book at any bookstore, pretty much any major bookstore in North America, or any indie bookstore. And I also have a new podcast called Rethinking Wellness, which continues on, exploring some of the themes in the book and in this conversation. Have lots more conversations with folks who, study and experience different aspects of wellness culture. And you can find that just by searching for Rethinking Wellness with Christy Harrison, or just Rethinking Wellness wherever you're listening to this.
Thank you so much, Christy. As always, it's such a pleasure.
Such a pleasure.
Rock on. As always, Christy has such a wealth of knowledge around these things, and I think that you will really enjoy reading The Wellness Trap, so definitely check that out. You can find all the links and resources mentioned at summerinnanen.com/268. Thank you so much for being here today. Rock on. I'm Summer Innanen, and I want to thank you for listening today. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Summer Innanen. And if you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts, search Eat the Rules, and subscribe, rate, and review this show. I would be so grateful. Until next time, rock on.